Hello, dear viewers. Who has never faced challenges in love? Today, we're going to discover the story of Betty and Thomas, a couple who overcame obstacles and rediscovered true passion. If you've ever been through ups and downs in a relationship, you'll identify with every moment of this exciting journey. Get ready to be enveloped and inspired by the power of their love. Picture this: it was a spring afternoon, the sun was starting to set. Betty was in the car, waiting to enter the church. Her heart was full of dreams and expectations. She had spent months planning every detail, dreaming of the moment when she would say yes to the love of her life. But then, something terrible happened. While she was waiting in the car, a friend came running and said, desperate, that her fiancé wouldn't show up. Betty stood there, dressed as a bride, heartbroken. Tears filled her eyes as she tried to understand what had happened. Being left like that suddenly left a huge hole in her heart, a very strong pain. As the days went by, her friends told her that her fiancé had fallen in love with someone else and decided not to get married again. When Betty discovered the truth, she remembered that in recent days Bernard had been distant and seemed to want to say something. His friends also said that the woman he fell in love with was very beautiful and rich. Suddenly, Betty felt enormous hatred and thought, I'm not going to be ridiculed because Bernard left me for someone else. She felt humiliated in front of everyone and needed to find a way to get revenge for this situation. Betty was desperate to show everyone that she was strong and would not be defeated by this betrayal. She wanted to prove that she was much better than the woman Bernard left her for. She remembered Thomas, a very rich man she met at a conference. Thomas was a millionaire, owning many oil companies around the world. Ever since he met her, he had fallen in love with her at first sight, tried to win her over in various ways, and had even invited Betty several times to visit her private island. At that time, she always refused his advances, of course, because she was engaged to Bernard and didn't want to get involved with another man. But now the story was different, after everything he had been through with the end of his relationship, and the desire to get revenge. She had changed her mind and remembered Thomas, the man who was interested in her at that event, and decided to look for him. When Thomas received Betty's call, he was overjoyed. He couldn't believe that the woman he had fallen in love with at an event was now looking for him. Even shaken by the end of her engagement, Betty found comfort in Thomas's arms, because he was kind and careful with her. Thomas turned out to be very different from Bernard. He was reliable, stable, and treated Betty with great affection. The days went by, they got to know each other more and more, getting involved. Thomas loved Betty in such an intense way that she had never felt before, and that made her feel safe, even if she didn't love him in the same way. Thomas didn't want to waste any more time, because now he was with the woman he once wanted so much. After little time together, he immediately asked her to marry him. Wanting to maintain her idea of not being left behind and taking revenge on Bernard, she accepted Thomas's request. After all, he was also a great choice and seemed like the right decision. But deep down in her heart, Betty knew she didn't love Thomas the same way she loved Bernard. She thought time could change that, but as the months passed, she realized that true love can't be forced. In the first few months of their marriage, they seemed happy on the outside. Betty did her best to reciprocate Thomas's love, but she always felt like something was missing. She was unable to give herself completely to the relationship, keeping a part of herself reserved. Even with all of Thomas's dedication and affection, he began to notice that something was wrong. He could feel that Betty was becoming more and more distant, and it hurt him a lot. He wanted her true love, but she always seemed to be far away. One day, while looking through the photo album, Thomas found an old photo of Betty with Bernard. He noticed how Betty's eyes sparkled back then and how radiant her smile was. A wave of jealousy and insecurity washed over him, making him wonder if he could ever compete with Betty's ex-fiancé. That's when everything started to change between them. Betty began to realize that Thomas was slowly distancing himself. Their conversations became superficial and gestures of affection became rare. Betty noticed that Thomas was spending more time outside the house, and sometimes he would get a call and rush out. This made a new feeling arise in her heart, the fear of losing him and being alone again. It was then that she realized that she felt more for Thomas than just gratitude or comfort. She felt real love. Determined to save her marriage, Betty decided to act before it was too late. She knew that Thomas loved her very much and that there was still a chance to work things out. So she started doing everything to win back her husband, showing how important he was to her. She surprised him with small acts of affection. Even with many servants, Betty cooked Thomas's favorite foods and spent time listening to his thoughts and concerns. But that wasn't enough. Thomas had spent a long time trying to win Betty's heart and ended up giving up. In order not to suffer any longer due to the lack of affection, he sought quick love in the arms of other women, without getting attached to any of them. He just wanted to feel loved. Did I discover too late that I neglected a great love because I wanted revenge on Bernard? Betty thought, when she realized that all her attempts to win Thomas back weren't working. One night, when Thomas got home, Betty asked, "Why don't you ever get home early, Thomas?" He, with a distant look, replied, "For what? To find a cold and disinterested wife? I prefer women on the street. At least they pretend to care about me and not just my money." These words deeply hurt Betty's heart. Betty didn't marry Thomas for money, she wanted revenge on Bernard, and in the process, she ended up falling in love with Thomas. She discovered what an incredible man he was and realized she never should have used him like that. Now, Betty wanted to right her wrongs and show Thomas that he had truly won her heart. She just hoped it wasn't too late. Betty was certain that Thomas still liked her. Betty decided to make one last attempt to save her marriage. Normally, when Thomas arrived late, she was already asleep. But that night, she decided to stay awake and planned a surprise for him. When he entered the room, trying to be quiet so as not to wake her, she saw that the bed was empty. Thomas thought, "Where is Betty?" At that moment, he heard a sound behind him. It was Betty. His eyes widened when he saw the scene. She was naked, sitting on a chair, showing herself completely to him, with a bold smile and an intense look. Despite trying to hide his feelings, the sight of her body, sitting on the bedroom chair and looking directly at him, gave him shivers of pleasure. The sight left Thomas transfixed, his eyes fixed on the enchanting image of his wife. Betty, confident in her sensual movements and certain that she would succeed, got up from her chair, walked over to her husband and whispered in his ear, "Every time you come home early, you will find what you want so much." After speaking, she hugged him and kissed him deeply. My friends, there was no way Thomas could avoid the wave of passion that burst from Betty's lips. He was paralyzed in front of that powerful woman he loved so much and who was right there in front of her. With his heart racing, he surrendered to her arms, to her kisses and caresses, full of desire and passion. From that moment on, their marriage achieved a happiness they had never experienced before. In the days that followed, Betty and Thomas began to dedicate more time to each other, rediscovering the connection they had and strengthening their bonds. They went out to dinner together, took long walks in the park, and rediscovered little pleasures they had put aside. Communication between them improved a lot, and they both began to open up more about their feelings and concerns. Betty discovered that a relationship cannot be maintained without true love. She realized that only love is capable of providing full and lasting happiness. And by putting pride and hurt aside, she found in Thomas the partner she always dreamed of, someone who loved her deeply and was willing to fight for their love. Thomas, in turn, also changed. He started coming home early, looking forward to spending time with Betty and enjoying every moment together. He understood that true happiness was not in material achievements or the approval of others, but in the love and partnership he had with Betty. Little by little, their house was filled with laughter and joy. They began planning trips and adventures together, dreaming of a future filled with love and complicity. Betty and Thomas learned to value each day, knowing that true happiness lay in cultivating love and mutual respect. Betty realized that despite their initial failures and the pain they had both felt, their love had grown stronger. She was grateful to have found in Thomas someone who loved her unconditionally and who was willing to walk alongside her no matter the challenges. And so, with every gesture of affection, every word of affection, and every moment shared, Betty and Thomas built a life together, filled with true love and lasting happiness. They discovered that, in the end, what really mattered was the love they felt for each other, and that this was the basis of a full and happy life. If you liked this story of love and passion between Betty and Thomas, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Here, you will find many more moving and inspiring stories about the power of love. Thanks for watching and don't miss the next stories.